And on behalf of not just our panel, but all the panels, I want to thank Chris and NCO and all of you for inviting us here to contribute. And it's very important to all of us, and we'll do our best. I also want to thank the folks from the National Archives for the terrific tours and reception last night. That was really great. I wanted to spend a few minutes on talking about what I think is really key, which is strengthening the system for creating the innovation and innovators for today and tomorrow. And I think that we would all agree across sectors, across institutions, that innovation is key to success. And I think many of us are concerned with the fact that the U.S. system for next generation innovation and innovators is faltering. By whatever metrics you choose to look at, the number of patents, the number of scientific publications, the amount of funding, very many things, the amount of majors in science and engineering, there are concerning statistics that are telling us that our system for creating this generation and the next generation of innovators and innovations are faltering. So the real question we need to ask ourselves is, will we be up to the hard decisions and the innovation and innovators needed in 2020, 2030, 2040? And if you think about it, the next generation of decision makers are CEOs, are politicians, are scientists, are leaders, are economists, innovators, etc. Many of those folks in the next decade are going to college now. And many of the folks in the decade after that are going to elementary school now and high school now. And the question is, what about our system for creating the best and the brightest that will be able to lead us through the next generation? So it isn't just a good thing to do. It's incredibly important, I think, for the future of our country and our competitiveness. So I wanted to talk a little bit about three areas that I think we can really help in creating a much better innovation system. And those areas are preparation, pipeline, and partnerships. I'll just talk about that briefly. Let's talk about preparation, and let's just start with what is the modern university. And for those of us who are involved in education, it is striking the kinds of problems that we have to deal with the kinds of institutions that support our activities. So if you think about, what's your dream list for the 21st century university, its curriculum should prepare us to deal with real-world challenges. In the real world, we have unprecedented complexity. We have constraints that mean a great deal: power constraints, economic constraints, policy constraints, all kinds of constraints. We have an unprecedented amount of cultural diversity. All of those things should be things that our students have some experience with in the university system. And it's very important for our universities to be moving ahead and creating curriculum that deals with that. There is enormous power in cyber, physical, and social environments, and synergism everywhere. As I was watching the President's discussion with Congress last night, the pundits were talking about how people were twittering. We were watching it on television. There's enormous convergence of these cyber and social and physical environments. Our universities have to represent that. That's what our students are doing in the real world. They need to be doing it in the university. And moreover, a university has to stand for an incubator for innovation and innovators. So it is very important that our next generation of leaders are able to have their first high-risk ideas in a university setting where the stakes are low and where they have a chance to understand how do you vet high-risk, high-reward ideas. And that's particularly important to us. So the university system is a really key part of the innovation system. Now, for the university system to be at its very best, the support system for the university, which is our K through 12 system, has to be at its very best. So we really need students who are ready for the university. Bill Gates testified to Congress last year. He has an incredibly interesting text, but one of the things he said is about 40% of our high school students are not really ready to attend college. How much remedial learning do we have to do in the college setting, and how does that not push us forward to being able to create these innovation systems? So, we all know both anecdotally and through a variety of different studies there's a variety of things that students need, but there is no substitute for time, tools, and attention. Small classes, broad-based curriculum, learning environments that are capable and reflective of the real world that students will live in, all of those things are tremendously important. And if we're not focusing on this, then we're really not going to be able to raise the CEOs and the leaders and the presidents and, the agency directors and all of the people in the future we need to help address these problems. Pipeline. Talk about the people. If you want leaders who are the best and the brightest, you want to have the biggest pool possible. That pool is not restricted to gender, it's not restricted to race, it's not restricted to a particular set of anything. You really want the biggest pool that you possibly can. And if we want to broaden the pool at the leadership level, we should not forget that there's a big jump between the entry levels and the leadership levels. So if you think about all of the kinds of intermediate stages, we need to keep the pipeline very broad. I think Maria is a great example. I asked her permission to be able to use her. She didn't just jump from very capable PhD to very distinguished president of Harvey Mudd College. She had a lot of opportunities, which she earned, in between to really serve and get the kind of training she needs to be president. She was a department chair, she was a vice president, student and academic services, she was a dean, etc. And being able to have those leadership opportunities and be able to get our best and our brightest in, not just at the beginning levels, but at the intermediate levels and the top levels is really important for broadening the pipeline. Last but not least in these three things I want to focus on is partnership. And I think that the links between our various communities and groups are weaker than they should be. So if we really want to create a viable innovation system, we need to go beyond the current levels. There are intellectual barriers between the private sector and the academic sector. We haven't really worked through a way to make that bidirectional, both in terms of intellectual property and in terms of workforce. It's possible now to spend limited amounts of time from the academic sector and the private sector. It should be possible to go the other way. We should be interacting with each other in a much more integrated way. Our cyber infrastructure oftentimes starts at the federal level and then it just drops off the cliff. It's not picked up by the university or the private sector or someone who can create some sort of a bridge there and some sort of a continuing evolution. It's incredibly important. And if you think about it, one concerning but really interesting statistic I found was that more Americans select television as their source for science and technology information than any other medium. These people are not watching the Discovery Channel. They're watching CSI, they're seeing, crazy scientists, and as much, crime solving and problem solving that we all do in our real lives, it would be nice for people to see a spectrum of real science and engineering and technology careers represented in a reasonable way. The media should be one of our partners. International partners should be partners with us. We need to be thinking out of the box about partnerships. So I want to spend the last couple of minutes just talking about getting there because I think Michael's comment and other people's comments were very important. It's not just setting the vision. It's not just knowing where the puck is. It's figuring out how you're going to skate to get there. And one of the things we are terrific at in academia is optimizing. So we optimize for whatever the situation is. And I think in order for us to optimize for the things that are important, we need to set concrete, quantifiable, and qualitative measures for what that is. So if we care about innovation and we decide that one measures innovation by patents, we can ask the question, how many successful patents were awarded to your institution during a time period? If we care about diversity and broadening the pool, we can ask the question, what percentage of the grants submitted by your institution over the last year, the last 5 years, had women or underrepresented minorities as PIs or co-PIs, because that's the intermediate level, and that's a really important level. Quality measures are harder. Knowing what transformational science or impact or successful cyber infrastructure, extremely important. But if we don't even take a stab at quantifying what that is, we will never figure out how to get there. So I think that's an important thing for us to try to do. Last but not least, I want to talk to the folks from federal agencies in this room, because I want to say to you that I think you have tremendous power. And it's not just the power of the purse. In many ways, you set up the game, and those of us in the academic sector play the game. And creating games where the rules make sense, and we get to go towards a direction that are real goals, are really important. Power of policy. When people say, thank you, when people say open source, that made a tremendous difference in terms of what we all did at the universities. Power of asking the question. If someone says to our PIs, what's your data management plan? All of a sudden people are starting to think of, what is my data management plan? Explicit goals, metrics of success, prioritization, all of those are important. Power of recognition, career awards, the Presidential Young Investigator Program, the Pioneer Awards, all of these things make careers. It's not just the money, it's the recognition that's tremendously important. Power of partnership and power of funding. Money is great. The more the better, but money strategically spent is the very best. So I'm happy to have any questions. I hope I stuck with my time. Yes.
Thanks. I just want to make one comment. I'm Jeff Alexander with New Economy Strategies. I deal a lot with state workforce strategy issues. And when you talk about the pipeline, especially in this kind of context, I notice a lot of times you or people omit community colleges and vocational schools. And if we're talking about infrastructure and systems, often the people who are going to be maintaining those systems are not going to go through university education, or they're certainly not going to go through a PhD program. And so it may be somewhat beyond the traditional scope of a forum like this, but it might be worth considering what are going to be the effects on how do we train the non-university workforce in the future to support the innovation system.
I really agree with that, and I would also say that community colleges are becoming an incredibly important part of the system with the economics and with the difficulty of getting in the university system in today's economy. So now, they're now, I think, taking an even broader role than they did before. Other questions? Marjorie?
I also wanted to pick up on the diversity point, because what I've been seeing is that in higher education, the conversation about diversity has gone from, this is the right thing to do, to a recognition that the demographics in this country mean that the traditional white-dominated pool of the more selective schools in particular is just diminishing. The numbers are changing of the students who are available, and the kind of work that needs to be done to cultivate people from other parts of the population is an area that requires a lot more thinking that I've seen taking place. There are some interesting programs that reach down into the high school level, for example, even through the Broadening Participation in Computing program through NSF. And I think that perhaps some greater thoughts about what the colleges can do to reach into those earlier parts of the pipeline and develop more people from other parts of the population, this would be very timely.
Yeah, it's not just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. Yes, Mark? I'm sorry, Maria.
Just a small point. The measure you're suggesting of patents is probably antithetical to greater partnership with industry. Because in my experience, the biggest problem we have in sending people to universities and working tightly with universities is when a university wants to patent some of the work, it ends up with untold legal problems. And that's, aside from the funding issues, that's probably one of the bigger impediments to that joint work. So I'd be very careful about that, using that measure.
Well, I think it's really important for this group in particular to think about lowering that boundary between the private sector and the academic sector. And the whole intellectual property area, patents, whatever, all of those things are really an important part of, I think, something that really needs some rethinking. Maria?
Okay, none of these are working.
Do you want this one?
Thanks. I just wanted to make the comment about the quality of K to 12, and you pulled out class size and curriculum and attention tools as things that really improve learning by students. But in fact, most recent research shows that actually the number one impact is knowledge of the content by the teacher. And one of the huge issues that faces the United States is that in many school districts, half or more of the teachers teaching math and science have no knowledge of the content. And the fact that the two issues that really influence teachers, people with knowledge of math and science and ability in those areas and passion and the people and communication skills to be able to become good high school teachers, the two issues that stop them from going there is that the salaries are low, and approximately half of the math and science high school teachers who start as math and science high school teachers leave within the first 3 years because of the difficulties of all of the responsibilities they have to handle. So I just wanted to put it on the table that when we think about improving K to 12, we really have to get more talented people into the system. We have to pay them better. We have to give them the support that will allow them to succeed.
So it looks like I've timed out, but that means it looks like that Owen is timing in. Thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to the discussion later. And Owen, I'll have you come up here, but first I want to talk about you. Owen Astrachan is a professor of the practice of computer science at Duke University, and he's also the department's director of undergraduate studies for teaching and learning. His research has been part of an inaugural NSF-sized Distinguished Education Fellow Program looking at undergraduate curriculum. He's also the winner of the Robert B. Cox Distinguished Teaching in Science Award and the Richard K. Lublin Teaching Award from Trinity College. This is Owen.
Thank you. So I'm going to start with 2 quotes and talk about each of them. Our species needs and deserves a citizenry with minds wide awake and a basic understanding of how the world works. So Sagan exhorted us arguably to reach for the stars. We have an information and cyber universe at hand, and an educated citizenry should be up to understanding the implications of security, privacy, and access. So this is a new call. This is an old call from Carl Sagan, but the time is ripe now for us to heed to this. At the same time, in the educational world, we have an issue that Mencken tells us. The aim of public education is not to spread enlightenment at all. It is simply to reduce as many individuals as possible to the same safe level, to breed a standard citizenry, to put down dissent and originality. So we should be aware of the trouble in changing our educational system. We must make education, especially K-12, and the work I'm going to talk about is work in high school. We must make this enlightening. We don't want a standard citizenry. We should guard against attempts at helping our students attain a high level of mediocrity. It's not simply that, as Robert Browning told us, our reach should exceed our grasp, but that we must make sure that ceilings are high enough for everyone in the cathedral of learning, or perhaps it's a bazaar of learning if you know about the differences between cathedrals and bazaars. We can't accept the status quo. We must make sure that areas of knowledge, especially the STEM disciplines, are pushed out to everyone. It's not enough for a stimulus package to supply broadband to every community. We must supply broad and deep ideas to our students at all levels. But we must cope with an increasingly digital world that makes it clear that we have to help our students think computationally. So, I'm not sure if you can see this comic in the back, and if you haven't seen Randall Munroe's webcomic of romance, sarcasm, math, and language, then I suggest you do at xkcd.com. If you can't see this whole one, I'll just kind of point out the salient characteristics of it. On your left, depending on where you are, a crypto nerd's imagination. His laptop's encrypted. Let's build $1 million cluster to crack it. No good. It's 4096-bit RSA. Blast. Our evil plan is foiled. On the right, you have the real world. His laptop's encrypted. Drug him and hit him with a $5 wrench until he tells us the password. Got it. So what's this about? You have the imagined world of the technophiles and then the real world. In the case of NITRD, we must run with our imagination. We shouldn't let the real world totally constrain us, although we have to be aware of it. We must strive to make things happen, even if the educational system is hard to change. And we need a plan to change things. We must work not to let ourselves be stopped because of the constraints of the educational system that we live in. I looked to Neil Postman for some advice in the educational system. So here's a quote. English is not history. History is not science. Science is not art. Art is not music. Art and music are minor subjects. English, history, and science are major subjects. A subject is something you take. When you've taken it, you've had it. And if you've had it, you're immune, and you need not take it again. That's the vaccination theory of education. You can take this tongue-in-cheek excoriation of our model of education and turn it on its head, because the time is right for us to do that. We have to work in an interdisciplinary way. We must not treat the cyber citizenry, our education about computer science and computational thinking, as a problem that only dweebs and the technological early adopters care about. We have to work to show that we can solve problems across all disciplines, not just math and science, but social sciences and humanities. With all the world's books searchable, doesn't what we read and how we read change? Is the Kindle or an iPhone an enabling technology? And what's the science behind those devices? We have to work to make sure that what we're doing works with other disciplines, take their examples, use them in our courses, and leverage math and science and STEM in general to show what computational thinking is about. I work at the intersection of high school and college. These are two very different places. I taught high school math and computer science for 7 years. I came to computer science late because the one course I had as an undergraduate in the ancient times before you could major in computer science didn't show me the beauty and the elegance of computer science. I saw that in mathematics. But we have an obligation at the university level to make the materials that we develop available to those in high schools where that's appropriate. And we should be judged by how our materials are used, just as we're judged on how our publications are viewed by our peers. The world of high schools is a different place. We don't have lockers at universities, but we do have an interdisciplinary science building, and we have a building where engineers, physicians, and scientists work together. We have to work together to provide the curriculum, books, and materials and have them used at all levels. Educational funding at NSF has been a fantastic resource in this area. It needs to be greater. Jeanette Wing's work has been wonderful in this area in terms of expanding computational thinking, and we must make sure that it continues to be this way. In order to do that, I'm going to take what was the country motto in Kenya, Harambee, which means we have to all pull together. We can't do this by ourselves in academia. We can't do this with just government funding. We can't do this with just industry funding. We have to work together, even if we don't know we're working together. Researchers, scientists, educators, teachers, funding agencies, philanthropic organizations, industry, 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 industry. We need to provide incentives and reasons and opportunities to work towards creating resources for students at many levels. We need to fund development of curriculum, build technological infrastructure, and educate a whole new cadre of teachers. We need to find the teachers. We need to fund the teachers. We need to help them be able to teach what they love and are educated to do. We need to get companies to work together to build and fund educational programs, not simply ask that our students be able to program multi-core chips, but help provide the funding to make that happen and expand the pipeline for many, many, many more students of different interests, abilities, genders, and races to help us innovate, to help us develop new science and build new programs and new ways of communicating. The people at NSF and the people at College Board are collaborating on an initiative in this area, led by Jan Cuny at NSF, that will hope to push a whole new curriculum into high schools and into colleges. Computational thinking. On your left is a picture of the internet. It doesn't look like the internet. On your right is whole genome shotgun. What is computational thinking? It's about solving problems that involve massive amounts of data. It's about doing things that somebody says can't be done. The people that did the whole genome shotgun program had to fight against people and other organizations that said that wasn't going to work. In the development of the internet, packet switching wasn't going to work. Telephony was the way, but packet switching did work. How do we leverage the internet? How do we study it? How do we expand it? How do we work on privacy and security as we come to depend on these things? We have to embrace these large-scale efforts and not project our ideas onto simple things, but show that our discipline has enabled an entirely new world, new opportunities, new horizons. We have to use the wisdom of crowds. We have to leverage our collective intelligence to make schools better, different, accountable as necessary, but no more. We have to work to share and engender our passions. I'm done. With 2 minutes to go. That means we have extra time for questions or more questions than David, if there are any. Yes?
Sort of a comment following up on the comment about that the teacher need to know what they teach. I think we have the problem in academia. It's not only at the high school. You have been talking about interdisciplinary and working together and all this. I don't think that most of us in academia do it, practice it. So there's no chance we will be able to teach it. So the problem is throughout the whole system. If we want to generate students that know how to work in an interdisciplinary setting or to think this kind of computational thinking, I think most of us operate in silos, and the reward system, everything around us, the culture, is pushing us to work this way. So the problem is not only at the school, the problem is in the top university.
I think that you're largely right, and that we need to develop resources to help. It's not just resources, it's changing the system. It's changing the system.
You don't simply fund a bunch of people to work together and walk away from it. I don't think that we have ever invested in teaching, in understanding the process of working together. It's all about funding, and in my opinion, it doesn't work.
Your school could change that if it starts at the presidential and provostial levels. That can filter down. That's working where I am. I don't know how to make that work where you are, but I can tell you that interdisciplinary teaching and learning and research happens when it starts at the top. It's harder maybe to make it work in a systemic way starting at the bottom. Yes?
David Bader, Georgia Tech. So I would encourage the academics to take a look at Georgia Tech as one model. As Miron mentioned, typically academics are siloed. We've created a new department focused on computational science and engineering that's interdisciplinary by nature. And we've had to understand the reward system in academia. We've had to understand the funding models. And also one of the areas that really affects what we do is in partnerships and collaboration among faculty from different cultures. And by cultures, I mean computer science, mathematics, aerospace engineering, biology, and others. And I think as we go forward, this is an area that should be a greater discussion, not just among universities, but also among funding agencies as we try to solve these real-world challenges. Thank you.
So I think we should look for best practices at many places and see if we can adopt those best practices, even at Wisconsin.
Other questions? Yes, Mike?
Mike Nelson, Georgetown. I'm really glad Myron brought this up because this is a word we use all the time, multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, but we don't focus enough on clearing those barriers. And when I mentioned the need for NITRD to focus on the how, this has got to be towards the top of the list. We've got to find a way that when you're evaluating grant proposals, you actually reward those proposals that half the people on the panel don't understand because it's outside their scope. And that's exactly the opposite of what we do today, where unless everybody around the table gets it and really understands the field, there's not enough support to go out and fund it.
I think that echoes what
Right.
Gene was talking about with funding big projects that might fail.
Right. The second piece of this is I teach in an interdisciplinary program at Georgetown, and it's not just different disciplines of science. We have, in my class, I'll have film majors, business majors, law students, as well as people working on technology and communication. And the first thing you do when you go in the room is you have to realize that on any given topic, the professor knows less about that piece of the topic than somebody in the room. And that's a very hard thing to do. And training professors to get used to asking the students for advice and help is a new mode and something we might want to explore as we try to train the next generation of cyber-aware people who are broad enough to use all these technologies in all the places that they need to be used.
Other comments? I wanted to make a comment as well, Owen, following up on, I think, a really key thing that Marone said, which is the incentive system has to support. If we think interdisciplinary science is important, and it's probably hard to find someone, say, in this room who doesn't, the incentive system has to support it. And it's tremendously difficult to get tenure being an interdisciplinary scientist. There are areas, computational biology is one of them, where there is more or less a more traditional kind of setup. So one could imagine getting tenure. But if you're in digital humanities or, other kinds of interdisciplinary fields, it's tremendously difficult to get tenure in those fields. Maria?
I want to echo what Owen said is there are some universities and some colleges who've made this a priority, and they've had to do it by changing the tenure and promotion procedures. They've had to do it by, things like making joint appointments between departments work. They've had to do it by really training people to be able to work interdisciplinary, because the differences in cultures and language, value systems across different disciplines are huge. It can be done. I think it really should be done for our entire educational system, both for research reasons, but even more importantly for the education of our students, because we are just producing, most of the Research One universities are producing the same kinds of PhDs as were produced 30 years ago or even 40 years ago. And we're not going to change how we do research and achieve the kind of research that is described in the NITRD or NITRD. Somehow NITRD is probably better. We're not going to achieve that unless we change the way we educate our students.
I think our time is up. One more question?
I'm a fan of mathematics. I feel like a little bit, I agree with all of the talks, but I feel like I'm already in the second derivative. I'm really interested to the first derivative of the curve, which is how to design the strategy plan of IT strategy plan to impact the education. So that's what my comment is. So the bottom line is I would like to have that conversation back to the key point of how our strategy plan to be emphasized for the future education.
Are you introducing Bryant?
Thanks very much, Owen. Next up is Bryant York. Bryant is a professor in the Computer Science Department at Portland State University and co-director of the Laboratory for Learning and Adaptive Systems. His research includes computer vision and expert systems, software engineering. Bryant's a fellow of the ACM and a recipient of the Nico Haberman Award for his contributions to increasing the number and successes of underrepresented members in the computing research community. And that's a tremendously important community honor, so we congratulate Bryant. And here you go.
Thank you, Fran, and thank you all. I'm honored to have been invited. So today I wanted to, the title of my talk was Strategies for NIT Education, Workforce, and Diversity, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what the subtitle is in a moment. I think this last discussion actually leads into what I'm going to talk about this morning. So the last discussion, Marone brought up the point about interdisciplinary research and how difficult it is for different intellectual cultures to talk to each other, to actually work together. And so I want to talk a little bit about how we get to a more diverse workforce by making a few simple suggestions. And I sent in 30 slides, but I'm only going to use 3. And I wanted to give a couple of simple examples. Serendipitously, I had a phone conversation with Ivan Sutherland on Friday, and I'd like to recount what happened in that conversation. I asked him if it was okay, and he said yes. So I call Ivan Sutherland, and he wants to have a technical discussion, and then we start to talk about things that are not quite technical. So after a short time, he starts talking to me about the character of institutions, that institutions have distinct characters. And I said, well, yeah, that's true, and I've observed over the years that Carnegie Mellon happens to have this very distinct character. It seems to have, I'm just using this one institution, we used others as examples, but Carnegie Mellon was the one we used primarily. So it seemed to have this character of, and I said, well, how would you characterize it? And he paused for a moment and he said, humanity. And so really what I wanted to talk about this morning was how humanity and diversity can bias how we start to look at this strategic plan. So I wanted to talk about how humanity. Sorry. Okay. So I want to talk about how humanity and diversity can work to bias the development of the strategic plan. It is, in my opinion, it's related to the last discussion in that the point that Marone was bringing up. We need to find ways to get people to work together to produce better results than we do than we're currently doing. So the subtitle of my talk is The Journey to Tata Woman Land. So Tata in Chinese, Ta means he and Ta means she. And so it's a sort of a surrogate for gender equity, a way of bringing together males and females in a way that loses the unimportant distinctions. And woman is about us. It's about bringing people together with across cultural and ethnic boundaries. So those are the two kinds of things I want to talk about. So now the next slide has just 3 important ideas and that's basically what I want to say in the talk. There are 3 important ideas that I'd like to push, and I'd like people to think about as they go through the next 2 days of this process. So the first idea is that I think we need a presidential intellectual stimulus package. So now that the economic stimulus package is underway, I would like to see President Obama actually take advantage of his popularity to continue to keep young people engaged, but in this case, particularly around STEM. I would like to see him engaged around STEM and CS and IT disciplines. So one of the requests I wanted to make in terms of the how was that he devote 10 minutes of his weekly address to talking about some STEM problem. And I mean a serious STEM problem. I don't mean talking about STEM funding or other things. I mean talking about a specific STEM problem. The second point that I wanted to make is about technology and courage. So during my conversation with Ivan Sutherland, he pointed me at a paper that he wrote in 1996. It's called Technology and Courage. And that paper lists a set of recipes. There's a collection of if-then rules which come from his own personal experience about how to, when you have a feeling of courage, the kinds of things that you can do to get yourself back on track, to build up your courage again. And I think this is important not just for faculty, but for students, for administrators, and government employees. We need to think about these, and there are several examples in this paper. I have one on one of the later slides. We don't need to see it now, but during the discussion, if you want to see it, we can bring it up during the discussion. So the third point is I thought that it would also be useful to have a document on diversity and courage. It would be nice to be able to, some people would call this best practices, but it would be nice to be able to point to a document which had a similar set of recipes about how we deal with the tough questions of diversity. We've been trying to deal with those over the last 30 years and not really making much headway. And so this really requires that we have open discussion and really start to get at what it means. So why? Because it's important. As Maria said and as Fran has said and Owen said, we need innovation. It's going to be one of the generators for innovation, and we need to solve this question early. We're losing a good portion of the population in terms of contribution by not getting them up to speed early. So the representative programs that I've looked at, the ones that I'm most familiar with are the ones at NSF, and the Broadening Participation Program is a good example of this. In this program, there are probably 10 or 12 alliances, and those alliances have started to build a synergy, and that synergy is around one-on-one mentoring. So some people think of this as a new approach to human capital development. I think of it as a return to the old approach. So in the old days, each thesis advisor had one student. He graduated one student maybe every 2 years. Sometime in the 90s, the pressure to produce more students drove everybody to 12 students. The quality of mentoring went down. The quality of students produced went down. So I think we need to have a discussion about quality and about getting back to one-on-one mentoring. And I believe that part of the source of this was that unreasonable expectations about scaling were generated in the 1990s. So many programs that were doing very well in the 1990s, but they weren't growing at the expected rates of 20% per year, were canceled. And I think we need to let things like BPC play themselves out so that we can see the return, the value that we get from returning to this one-on-one kind of mentoring. So I have a bunch of crazy ideas, and I could probably flip to the crazy idea slide. So some ideas worthy of consideration of the intellectual stimulus package. I think more emphasis needs to be placed on informal versus formal education, a la John Bransford. We need to do some things about reducing the grain size. Students that we have now aren't really interested in reading a 1,200-page book. They're more interested in a sort of a 5-minute video. We need to look at how effective our gender-specific and culture-specific pedagogies and assessments are working. In here, I think of this as divergence in order to study individual cultures, but we have to come back and converge on the things that are common in U.S. culture. I think we need a robust and free cyber learning platform, the kinds of things that allow this to succeed in the earlier parts. There's some key challenges which I've sent in before. We can come back to these later. So these are the crazy ideas. As part of, I mentioned the first one. The second one is about an open design, participatory design for the cyber infrastructure and cyber learning platforms. I think a informed citizenry, one that feels like it's participating, will contribute a lot more and will get on board faster. I'd like to see a project like the WPA CCC projects in the 1930s. Only in this case, instead of doing physical labor, people will be doing intellectual labor. So we need to ramp them up for this. And another approach that might be useful, this is in the how category, is to get young people involved in these GWAP games that are competitive and cooperative so that they start to get stimulated around the kinds of ideas that we would like to see. So I'd like to see a set of STEM-based cooperative competitive GWAP games. So I'd like to finish with a quote from Barack Obama's book. So the reason for this quote is that we shouldn't expect this to be easy. This is going to be difficult because we're working in a context. But the one thing that's important about that book is it points out that throughout history, there were always periods of difficult times. And we had to work through those by trying to work together and by balancing all the opportunity versus power and concentration of power. So, I'm done.
Questions? SPAP?
Gene.
Well, I think this is on, or no?
No.
No? I don't want to see.
It's the infrastructure problem.
Yeah, well, it says it's on, but apparently it's not coming through. So, part of your comments there bring to mind that. How's this one? Oh, much better.
Excellent.
So, your comments certainly bring to mind the fact that in the realm of thought, in the realm of computation, we really don't care what the person looks like at the other end. And that's certainly something that we have been trying to embrace, perhaps not successfully. But what comes to mind is there's also the issue of the ability to participate. And an area where we have not done as well is with individuals with disabilities and limitations, being able to access. And this is tied to earlier comments when I think it was Janie was saying that we have an aging population of decision makers. I now have to put on these glasses to see up close, and the websites with small type are impossible to read. Mm-hmm. I have colleagues who have developed palsy of various kinds and can't use a mouse. And not only is this difficult for those of us who are currently trying to use the systems and trained in them, but as we have an aging population or a population that needs to be re-educated for different areas, they too need to have the ability to access. So we have a very big challenge area here, more than simply surface appearances, but in terms of capabilities. And I just wanted to make sure that that was on the record.
So it's on the radar. There is one large BPC alliance devoted to persons with disabilities. It's at the University of Washington, the Access Computing Alliance, which is focused totally on persons with disabilities. It's run by Richard Ladner. It's been very successful. I've worked with Richard over the years. I think it's very important. And so when I talk about diversity, I mean all kinds of diversity. So not just ethnic and cultural diversity, gender diversity, but disabilities, interdisciplinarity, all. If you recall, I'd like to recall one thing from Obama's speech last night. He asked that every American think about getting 1 year of education beyond high school. Now, I took that to mean every American, not just youth graduating from high school. And he also pointed out to high school students that if you drop out of high school, you're not just hurting yourself, you're hurting the nation. Now, this is an idea, it seems to me, that harkens back to the 1950s, where in the 1960s, when people had that sense of devotion to their country. And I think that we need to leverage that to get back to that kind of state. Marone?
Yeah.
So, do you see a relationship between courage and honesty? Or should we add honesty as another?
So I did think about this a bit, and there are multiple dimensions. In the 10-minute talk, I thought I could only hit the courage dimension. Yes, there is a relationship, and we need to build all of those. We need to build along all of those dimensions. I think this deserves a longer paper in the style of the one that was written by Ivan.
So if it's not included, I would like to see honesty as a first-class item in this discussion, because I think a lot of what we do and goes back to failure. We don't educate our students to admit that things went wrong, that things are hard. We are just putting, the nice picture on it and ship it to the next level.
So when you read Ivan's paper, he has these little recipes, and they're from his own personal history. But what you see is that when he has a failure of coverage, he reverts to honesty about himself. I hate washing dishes is one of his examples. So he's just being very honest with himself. And then he has this little recipe which says, I'll start by washing the first dish. And I'd like to see some more of that in the kinds of graduate students that I see, at least, and other students as well.
Oh, you are? Okay. Fran Berman, Director and Techie. Okay. I want to introduce Jane. Thank you very much, Bryant. Jane is a senior researcher. Jane Margolis is a senior researcher in the Institute for Democracy, Education, and Access at the UCLA Grad School of Education and Information Studies. Her research includes social inequity in education, gender and race gap in computer science. She's written 2 terrific books, Unlocking the Clubhouse, Women in Computing, and Stuck in the Shallow End, Education, Race, and Computing. Jane?
Thank you very much. As Fran said, I'm a social scientist, not a computer scientist, and I began my work looking at this question of computer science, looking at gender and why there were so few women studying computer science. And I did that at Carnegie Mellon at the higher education level, 1994 to 1999. And when I was there, I was very distressed by the few numbers of students of color, African American and Latino students at the higher education level. And I was determined for my next research work to look at what was going at the pipeline up to higher education and what was happening at the high school level. Just so happened at that point I moved to Los Angeles and was fortunate to get a National Science Foundation grant for a couple of years to look at the pipeline, what was happening with African American and Latino students, why so few were studying computer science. Why so few were studying computer science at the high school level. And I did this research in Los Angeles is the second largest school district in the country, one of the most diverse. I did concentrated research for 4 years in 3 schools. A lot of the schools, and these 3 were digital high schools, which was getting a lot of state funds to get technology into the schools. And we chose those schools, one because it was a typical Latino school in Los Angeles, 5,000 kids, overcrowded year-round. Another was a middle-class African-American school. And the other one was a so-called integrated mixed school in a white wealthy part of Los Angeles with 2/3 kids of color that were coming in from 101 different zip codes around the country. And even though this was Los Angeles, we've triangulated all our data and looked at what's been happening nationwide in high schools, particularly in high urban areas with high numbers of students of color. So our question was why so few were learning computer science. And the reason why I titled this The Disconnect was that at this point, when we started our research, the Gathering Storm documents were coming out, talking a lot about the need for innovation in this country, needing to broaden the participation in computer science and engineering and talent, and a series of documents related to the rising storm were coming out. And what we were seeing at the high schools, it was a complete disconnect with what we were seeing. So I'm going to briefly just talk about 4 summary points about what we found, what we've been doing about it, because our research turned into an intervention program, a partnership between higher education and K through 12, the Los Angeles Urban School District. I'm going to talk about briefly what we're doing, and where we think things have to go. So the state of education. First, myth of technology is the great equalizer. When we were there, digital high school was everything, getting the equipment into the schools, getting the internet, getting the infrastructure. All of this was really important. But we found that the school system was having great hopes, thinking that technology was going to be the magic bullet. It was going to really pull kids in. This was going to end the achievement, the achievement gap. And historically that has been true, that there's been so much hope put on the technology and on the equipment. But no one was asking was what were the kids learning, the content. And no one was asking which students were learning what about the technology and how to use the technology. So we found that there was great confusion in the school system about what is computer science anyway. So there was a mix-up between computer literacy and computer science. What our research was looking at was not the computer literacy, which is critically important for a cyber-capable, citizenry. Every student has to be computer literate and know how to use the equipment. But we were looking at who was learning what is now referred to as computational thinking. Who was learning the logic, the problem solving, the algorithmic thinking. Who was getting prepared so that they could go into the higher education level. And there we found that there were great disparities in the schools, and it really followed race and class lines. So that in the schools with a higher number of white students, there would possibly be AP computer science. In this district, there's 57 high schools, and out of those 57, only 11 offered AP computer science. Excuse me, I just have to get some water. Only 11 offered AP computer science. And in the schools with the high numbers of kids of color, which is in most of Los Angeles, the so-called computer science offerings were just the most rudimentary, introductory to computing, typing at that level. Now, I was talking to Jean Spafford, whose daughter goes to a high school in Indiana, and he said also in her high school the only computer science course is basically typing. But it is even worse in the schools, the low-resource schools with high numbers of African American and Latino kids. So it's the basic introductory. The teachers are self-taught. One of the biggest problems that has been identified is that there is no certification for computer science. Teachers come from business or they come from math. If they're math teachers, then they have to be pulled from math. Schools nowadays are not likely to give up a teacher. Certification is just missing. And so teachers are often isolated, self-taught. There's no professional development for them. No teachers, no classes. So what we have found, and we were very surprised because this was in the day of the gathering storm, we thought that schools would be bolstering up their computer science offerings, but actually there was a shrinking curriculum. And this was in the early, like around 2003, 2005, the curriculum was shrinking. So they were canceling, if there was a programming class, they were canceling it, lots because of the testing pressures. And computer science, and the most important point that creates this waterfall of problems is that computer science is considered a vocational course and not an academic course. And so it is not part of the academic core. It is a tech art. I think the history of this is that it came when computers first got into the schools. It was considered like typing and skills and a skill as opposed to a knowledge. And I'll just give a story that sort of captures this. In the school, one of the schools that we did the research, the Latino school, there was one programming class taught by a math teacher who wanted to take it on because he knew it was important. He taught himself. He offered this class on one track, 20 students. There was a pre-calculus girl, Susanna, who was really into technology and wanting to learn computer science. She was in the programming class for half a year, wanted to continue, and when we were interviewing her, she was in floral design instead of programming. And we asked her why that was, and she said, I don't know, I'm not a girly girl. I wanted to be in programming, but the class was full. There was, 30 kids in the class. She couldn't get into the class. And because computer science is a tech art, and she was assigned to what the other tech arts that was open, which was floral design. It could be floral design, child care, or service, which is when you're in a class to run hallway errands for the principal's office. And so here was this pre-calculus kid in the school who had wanted to be in programming. So that was sort of an extreme example, but not too extreme. The point being is that in many of these schools, the only computer course that has college preparatory credit is AP Computer Science. It is not there often. There is no pipeline of courses, no sequence of courses, and that it is considered a vocational art. So we did these findings, and then what did we do about it? We made a partnership with LAUSD, and we, over a series of years, tried to get more AP computer science classes into the district. But what we discovered were kids were not being prepared. So we have created a new course that is the essence of computational thinking in it, which we are getting through the UC system to be college preparatory. And we are trying to create a sequence of courses in real partnership with LAUSD. So what we have found is that CS has to be reclassified as an academic course. There needs to be a sequence of courses, an educational pipeline. More teachers have to be recruited. There needs to be certification of computer science, of a computer science certificate. There needs to be, computer science education has to be part of higher education, schools of education, and we need more new and exciting pedagogy. And there are organizations that are working endlessly on that. The Computer Science Teachers Association, the ACM Educational Policy Committee, and the NSF, Broadening Participation in Computing. This is a project that is going to take time, and it's going to need partnerships with higher education, K through 12, civil rights organizations, industry, and to really partner with these school districts, explaining the importance of computer science, and then the relationship with teachers and higher universities programs. And the major point of this is that, why I said systemic change is needed, is there's a lot of programs out there that are summer camps and summer programs, and these are all wonderful and they're all good. But we really believe that it has to be systemic. It has to be so tied in with educational reform, and that no longer computer science can be an island unto itself. It has to be with education. And look at this. And higher education can no longer wash their hands of this, and it has to be looking at what's happening at K through 12. And a very simple point, Stuck in the Shallow End is the book that just came out that describes in detail what's happening with these schools. The interest is there. The kids, and the interviews are in the book describing how kids in this aerospace math science magnet came to the school wanting to learn aerospace. There are no aerospace classes, no AP computer science. 30% of the kids we interviewed considered themselves techies, wanted to learn. The interest is there, but the opportunities to learn are not. And it is especially severe in schools with high numbers of African American and Latino kids. So that's it.
Questions? Dave?
David Bader, Georgia Tech. As we look at our nation going forward, there are a lot of grand challenges that we have to solve in sustainability and energy conservation. And in going forward, computing is a tool, yet when we see our students moving up this pipeline from K through 12 to college, computer science has had this notion of being for programmers or being web development and so forth. Is there a way as a nation to change that and really focus on problem-solving skills and not just teach computer science as computer science programming, but broaden it so that we have elementary school children learning about computational science or digital media instead of English classes, computational journalism, and so forth?
Well, there are great attempts at trying to integrate computational thinking throughout the curriculum. The course that we've designed that we hope will be able to be fully adopted by the Los Angeles School District, and then the curriculum is going to be available nationwide, has the essence of the problem solving. And you could say it's sort of a sampler, an introduction to this problem solving course. So there's human-computer interaction, web design and animation, some programming with Scratch, robotics. It's a way to pull kids in, get them excited, engaged, and they're going to be working with problems like the pollution around their school, collecting data, how that you can use computational thinking to sort through that. But it also needs to be integrated throughout the curriculum. We want to break through this sort of narrow programming-centric definition of computer science, and also convince the K through 12 that this is an academic discipline that will help kids whether they're going into computer science or not. I mean, if they're going into math, if they're going into English. And we've been very successful. We're in the co-PI of my grant through the National Science Foundation, Broadening Participation, is the Director of Science of the Los Angeles School District. So we are in a real partnership. That is, and a pitch here. The reason it's happening is because we've had multi-years of funding. And to create change, it's so much based on relationships and trust. And they heard our research. They saw we were not like placing blame. We were trying to make schooling better for all kids. We wanted to be in partnership with them. And it was through that trust that they're now willing to say, okay, we're going to take a risk. We're going to try to get these new courses in. We're going to see what happens. And they've been campaigning with us through the UC system to give college credit to this course. So one of the reasons kids were not wanting to take computer science often is because they have so many college courses that they have to take.
Thanks very much, Jane. We'll have over an hour for more questions, and I hope there's lots more questions for Jane, but I think right now we're gonna try to move on. Thanks, Jane. Our next and last speaker is Maria Clave. Maria became the 5th president of Harvey Mudd College in 2006. Previously, she was Dean of Engineering and Professor of Computer Science in Princeton. Maria is past president of the Association for Computing Machinery, past chair of the Board of Trustees of the Anita Borg Institute for Women in Technology, and a trustee of the Mathematical Sciences Research Institute. Maria's been involved in the community for a long time. We look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you, Fran. It's really a pleasure to be here. I'm going to talk about increasing the number of undergraduate CS or IT majors, and also increasing simply the number of undergraduate college students who take a course related to information technology or computer science. And so I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. I'm going to mention the issue, what causes the issue, and the solutions. And, the thing I want to really focus on is something that Alan Fisher said once in a talk that he was giving about the work that he did with Jane Margolis at CMU. It's not hard to solve this problem. It's not hard to understand what the issues are. But the problem is there is no silver bullet. It has to be solved by a whole bunch of places, let's say all of the colleges and universities, deciding to put some effort into it. And every single place that has decided to do something about this has made significant progress. So if we could just convince ourselves, our community, to take this on, we would make progress. So the issues. There was a steep decline in the number of students choosing to major in computer science shortly after the dot-com bust. And I stole a slide from Jan Cooney, from a talk by Jan Cooney, which shows it shows the correlation between the number of freshmen that express, the percentage of freshmen that express an interest in majoring in computer science, which is the gold color on the graph, and the green one is the number of the percentage of college graduates that are in computer science, and you can see they track very closely together, and you can also see the really precipitous dip over the last few years in interest. But what this graph doesn't show is that the decline was much steeper for females. Now, we were already, over the last 25 years, computer science is the only area the only STEM discipline where female participation has declined over the last 25 years. In every other area, it has gone up. So why is this? What is going on? So I broke the causes for this into areas that apply to all students and then ones that apply particularly to females. So the first thing is that our public, teachers, parents, and students themselves believe that, number one, IT is over. Our time is over. We are done. The second one is, yes, there are still some IT jobs left in the economy, but if they haven't already gone to places like India and China, they will soon. They also believe that computer science is for those people that start programming before puberty. And I have one of those, or had one of those, my son, who's now 26, going on 27. And it's really true that my daughter, who's now 24, looked at him and I tried to bribe her to take a course in computer science. No luck. They also believe that computer science and IT jobs are jobs for people who like to work it alone. The concept of working on a team or having to communicate or problem solve is nowhere in their understanding of what computer science or IT jobs are. As you've just heard from Jane, students in high school and in college lack exposure to computer science. They are clueless about what actually happens in computer science. But we also have responsibility among our own community as people who teach particularly introductory computer science, but also higher level computer science courses. Because we went through a time in the 90s and also in the 80s where there was a big boom in interest in taking computer science, and the number of faculty were not keeping up with that, we developed a gatekeeping mentality. We felt that it was okay for a large percentage of our students not to want to take another course after that first one because we didn't have the resources to handle them. And then, as I think all of you know, traditionally the introductory course, and this includes APCS or has included APCS, it's too focused on programming and particularly on syntax rather than problem solving, big ideas, computational thinking, or the vast array of applications that computer science is used in. So what about females? Well, one thing we know about both males and females is that they choose their majors. This is at least in the United States and in North America. It's less true in China and India. Students choose their majors based on what they think they like and what they think they're going to be good at. And, you hear, do something you're passionate about. Do something you love, and you'll be happy for the rest of your life. Well, females are sure, for the most part, that they won't like it. For them, computer science is the same as programming, and programming is boring, and it's also lonely. And they also know that CS majors are socially challenged. And, they don't want to have to associate with those people. One of the reasons they think they won't be good at it is certainly in most high schools and middle schools, programming is a boy thing. It's seen as a boy thing. But even those females that are interested in computer science, they are more likely to leave computer science even though they may be doing really well. And if you want to understand more about this, Unlocking the Clubhouse, which was the first book by J. Margolis and Fisher, it will tell you about that in detail. But the key reasons are they feel they don't belong, even if they're getting straight A's, because they do other things in the evening than read computer magazines or Slashdot. They think they're not, quote unquote, real computer scientists. Females are more likely to suffer from the imposter syndrome and attribute their success to luck rather than hard work or ability. And the way we've structured, in most places, our CS curricula is that we emphasize sort of the innards of computer science first and applications later. And there's lots of data to show that women and minorities are more likely to be interested in the applications than in the innards of computing. So, what could we do to solve this? Well, we could increase the positive exposure to computer science and information technology in high school, and that's what Jane is working on. It's what the project that Jan Cooney is working on, and Owen and others with the College Board. We can change the introductory computer science course at the college level, and there are wonderful examples of places that have done this: Georgia Tech, Bryn Mawr, Carnegie Mellon, Harvey-Mudd College, the University of British Columbia. All of them are happy to share their materials with others. But you can also create a course that comes before that, let's call it Computer Science 0 instead of Computer Science 1, and use the standard computer literacy course to attract people that would never think about taking really a computer science course, but then encourage them to go on and take the introductory computer science course afterwards. You can promote combined or double majors, for example, computer science and biology, computer science and art, etc. You can get female students and minority students involved in doing research after their frosh year. It's hard to get jobs, interesting jobs that year. If they've had an introductory computer science, you can actually get them involved in research, and it's a wonderful way to get them to choose to major. And you can increase the sense of belonging for non-traditional people. And I just want to take a moment to talk about OK to Cry. I've given this talk a lot of places, and I cannot tell you how many females of all ages who've come up afterwards and said, "Thank you for doing that. If you'd given this talk before I started as a student, I might have lasted in computer science." Okay, what is the first thing you do when a student or anyone else, male or female, is starting to cry? You hand them a box of Kleenex. The reason is that it's really embarrassing to start to cry, but it's worse when your nose starts to run. Okay, the second thing you do is you say, "I cry all the time. Don't worry about it." And you just get on with what the conversation is. Because the thing is that many males, first of all, women cry for reasons different than men. They often cry because they're angry or frustrated. They don't want to cry, but instead of banging the table, they may burst into tears. Men get freaked out by it. And, "Oh, I've hurt her feelings, or I've done this, or I've done that." Just treat it as normal. It's as normal as raising your voice. Okay, solutions work. I just put it down 5 examples here. Every single one of these, the computer science department or the College of Engineering or the College of Science or whatever, decided they were going to make a difference. They have seen radically increased numbers in the numbers of females. So I'll just tell you about UBC. I was at the University of British Columbia for 15 years. Over a 5-year period, we decided to try and increase the percentage of females. I have to say, we don't have some of the opportunities that a place like Mudd or CMU would, because our admissions process is not for computer science, and it is controlled just by grades. We went from 16% to 26% of our CS majors being female in 5 years. We did pretty much everything that I said on this list. At this point, 33% of the double majors with computer science and something else are female. 40% of the double majors between computer science and biology. I could give you similar statistics about other kinds of places. Bryn Mawr changed their introductory course. They used to have like 2 CS majors per year. They're now looking at like 30. This is not that hard to do, but you just have to do it. I'll close there.
I think in the interest of time, because we have the webcast and a lot of folks online, we're going to please hold your questions, but we'll be talking about it in about 15 minutes and after the break. Yes?